speaker, which I've already taken 3 minutes of his time, is Jean, not Jean, Jean. He's from Belgium, and it's probably late over there, so really appreciate him being here. Met him in Berlin during Tournament of Champions for NetWars. You were a facilitator for my SANS course, and you've come a long way, my friend. You're now a SANS instructor. You do 699, the Advanced Purple Team course. You just did a run, I think, a week ago, so that's awesome. And Chief Fun Officer at NVISO. I didn't know that was your official title. I thought it was more Red Teamer, but I'm going to be quiet, let you take it away, and very excited about this talk. You're going to show some pretty cool stuff. So go for it, my friend.
Thank you. So I was going to ask, can everyone see my screen? But I assume yes, because I can see it myself as well. So I have the luxury of actually running on two screens. So I'm seeing myself present while I'm presenting as well. That also means that I have like half an eye on the Discord. So if there are any questions during my talk, I will do my best to address them live. But if I would miss them, then there will probably still be some time left for questions later on. So without further ado, I can actually almost skip over my Who Am I slide because of the excellent introduction that George gave. So just a quick recap maybe. So my name is indeed Jean-François Maes. I'm a red teamer at NVISO Security, which is a Belgian consultancy firm. I'm also the host of the Voices of InfoSec podcast, which is a new initiative that I launched last month. Yeah, exactly, last month. There are the first 3 episodes are online, and it's basically tailored to new joiners in the InfoSec community to help them, motivate them, and level up their careers. I'm also a contributor to the SANS SIG 560 courseware, and I'm an instructor for the 699 course, which is indeed a purple team course. I'm wearing red today. Thanks for the swag, by the way, George. I also have a purple one, but given that this talk is more red team oriented, I thought that the red shirt was a better fit here. And yes, I'm also a fitness goer, so I'm following Dave Kennedy, of course, with the Red Team Fit initiative. So it's very nice as well. So let's talk about the agenda for today. There are 4 points that I want to talk about. First, I'm going to do a small trip down memory lane about how pen testing and more specifically red teaming evolved throughout the years. Then we will sharpen our scythe. Then I'm going to talk about how EDRs are hookers, but don't get any dirty ideas. It's not that kind of hookers. And finally, I will talk about Syscalls, which is quite cool. So let's take a short but sweet trip down memory lane. This is actually from before I was a red teamer myself. So I'm talking about maybe the Windows XP era, somewhere around that. And that's probably also when Metasploit started gaining popularity as well. So what ended up happening here in the infrastructure pen testing and the red team, red team scene, if you could call it red teaming back then already, was that attackers didn't really have a lot of issues with just taking an exploit from the internet, dropping it somewhere on disk or even maybe in memory, and just double clicking it, and boom, the exploit worked because, well, the antiviruses were not as advanced as they are today, and things just tended to work rather smoothly without having to do any process shenanigans or making any weird system calls or doing a lot of low-level programming. Things just worked out and everything was completely cool for attackers. But luckily for us, obviously, defenses became better over the years. And let's cue in OMSI. So OMSI is definitely a really cool invention from Microsoft. It's vendor agnostic, so probably your defensive solutions are leveraging OMSI one way or another. At least I hope so. It's a design decision, so let's be clear about that. Not all security products decide to implement OMSI. That kind of means, from my perspective, that you should probably rethink your security solution if your security solution is not leveraging OMSI, because, well, it's free, it's well documented. So just make use of that if you're a security vendor, because, well, AMSI is just awesome. However, AMSI is not without, failure, of course. There are some holes in it, especially now, even more so with the AMSI.fail project website that Flangvik on Twitter, Melvin, which is a consultant actually for the other company that Dave Kennedy has, TrustedSec. He launched the website where you can just generate an AMSI bypass at the click of a button, copy paste it in your PowerShell window, and there you go, you bypassed AMSI. So job well done. You can now run Mimikatz in memory and do all the kinds of fun stuff. But luckily for us, now we are a bit more in the ages of the EDRs, and, well, it's not rolled out everywhere yet, at least not here in Belgium, in the security landscapes that I encounter during my tests. But there is a lot of adaptation already. It's not 100%, but people and companies are starting to leverage EDRs more and more. And this is where it gets interesting, obviously, because EDRs are not just relying on AMSI, right? They have other kinds of functionalities. They have other decision logics out there to decide whether or not a payload, a process like shellcode injection, whether or not that's malicious. So it's getting harder for red teamers and just pen testers in general to actually exploit things without getting caught. So we have to adapt our tradecraft as well, which is why I've taken the liberty to actually, partner up with Scythe and start a demo campaign. You can see that here. Super cool Unicorn campaign. And basically what this campaign does is it will do nothing more than launch the Scythe client, load the print screen module, take a screenshot, shut down the controller again, and finish. So it will just take a screenshot, send it to the site server, the site command and control server, and then shut down gracefully. So if we take a look at how we can deliver our payloads that we just created in Scythe, right now, currently, there are, I guess 4 ways, because you have 64-bit and 32-bit, but actually only 2 ways, which is the executable or the DLL. But if we take a look at the threat detection reports that the nice folks of Red Canary made not that long ago, actually, you can see that the number 2 threat is actually Cobalt Strike, which is quite infamous for its execute assembly functionality, which is capable of, running C# binaries completely in memory through process injection, which is a nice segue because, well, if you look at the slides, overall rank 6 on the techniques that organizations get affected by is process injection. And currently, right now, I think the executable is doing some kind of reflection mumbo jumbo magic in the background. I haven't reversed engineered the executable, but from my red teamer point of view and doing it for purple teams as well, I want to cover those TTPs as well as an initial entry point because, threat actors use them as well. And right now, there's no possibility yet, maybe George will add that later after this talk, to just get shellcode, which you then can inject using any custom loader that you want to use as a red teamer. So as of today, that's not yet possible built in using the campaign client of Scythe. But luckily for us, there is a nice GitHub project by Monox Gas. If I butchered that name, I apologize. Which is a SRDI, which stands for Shellcode Reflective DLL Injection. And, well, that's kind of, difficult words, but in layman terms, what it does is it takes your unmanaged DLL. So this is, for example, the site DLL, and it will transform that into shellcode, which means that you can then use it in any custom loader that you want without needing to do any manual shellcode transformations or something like that. So that project takes care of that for you. And what does that look like? Well, it's actually fairly simple. You have, I think, 3. Let me check that really quickly right now, actually, because I have 2 screens. I'm in luxury position. So you have the Python convert to shellcode, and you have the PowerShell convert to shellcode, and a native convert to shellcode. So you actually have 3 methods within the SRDI project to generate shellcode from from any unmanaged DLL. And that is exactly what I did. So I started here with a variable in PowerShell. Unicorns are awesome. I imported the convert to shellcode module, which can be found in that GitHub repository. And I specified my super cool unicorn campaign side client DLL with the function name unicorn, because that was the exported function that I chose. As you can see here on this slide, the unicorn is my exported function name. So that's what you also see here. And then I have my my custom loader that I created to inject the shellcode in an arbitrary process that I want, which is a cool segue into the last talk that we've seen, because the guys over at Binary Defense also talked about the importance of parent-child relationships, right? And if you have the shellcode, now you have actually the capability of creating your custom loader. So you could do fancy process startup shenanigans to spoof parent IDs, or even spoof command line arguments, to make it look a bit more benign, and to blend in just a little bit more. So it's already a bit stealthier if you want to use Scythe for an actual red team operation, or even for the purple teaming, which is the use case that we use within NVISO. We usually do our red teams with our trusted command and control framework, and we do the debriefs, so the replayable TTPs, we deliver that to our clients in side packages. So that's how we use it. So this would be very nice as well to mimic the initial TTPs that we've used in our initial red team exercise, and just let the site mimic those as well. So let's talk about EDRs for a minute. Maybe this slide is a bit small, because you can see me and you can see this my slide as well. So the slide is already a bit smaller than if you would see the slide in full screen. But basically, Ethical Chaos, which is another pretty famous open source toolsmith, both red and blue, but primarily a bit more red. He actually wrote a nice blog post about creating his own EDR and then bypassing it. And this is basically code that I expanded upon myself. So I placed some hooks at commonly known, Win32 API calls to do process injection. So here I placed the hook at NT allocate virtual memory, NT write virtual memory, NT protect virtual memory, and then NT create thread. So that's the classic Win32 kill chain, so to speak, to start using process injection. And what I did here is I actually loaded my listener, my EDR listener, to inject Silent Strike, which is the name of the EDR, into my demo process, which is demo.exe. And if we launch that, if we see how that works, is I hit a key to allocate memory, but I get spotted by my EDR. I write memory, I get spotted again by my EDR. And then if I want to actually execute the shellcode, well, my EDR says, no, I see that you want to execute the shellcode. I am killing your process, so you cannot execute the remote thread. So it will allow the allocation of the memory. It will allow for the writing of the memory. But if it sees that you want to create a new thread pointing to that memory, it will say, no, not today. It will kill your process and your payload will not be delivered. And that's a bit to mimic how modern EDRs work as well, because I didn't want to bypass any EDRs live, because I don't want to make people angry that might be listening in that are EDR vendors. So that's why I chose to create this custom implementation, so to speak. So if we launch our demo injector and we have an EDR in place, well, you've seen it in the last slide, right? We get spotted and nothing happens. So we check in our command and control. We are a red teamer. We want that stress of did the beacon connect back or not? And well, we wait and we wait and we wait and nothing happens. So that's not great. We have to take other more drastic measures in how to bypass or EDR. And this is where EDRs are hookers, which is what I already mentioned. EDRs typically hook specific NT-DLL.TLL exported functions and make decisions whether to allow the API call or not, based on, well, internal logic that is left to the discretion of the engineering teams at EDR vendors. So if the EDR says it looks fishy, then it will stop its the payload in its tracks. Or if it says, oh no, it looks all right to me, then it will let you resume the Win32 API call like it would normally do. And here you can see what makes NTDLL.TLL so special. So all the exported functions of NTDLL.TLL are basically just syscall wrappers, and they form the bridge between user land and kernel land. So that means that at the lowest level in user land, you will call an NT function. So if you use a Win32 API call and you're actually leveraging kernel32.tll, well, kernel32.tll will, in his call tree, call the corresponding NT function at a lower level. So from an EDR's perspective, it's always nice to hook at the lowest level that you can, so you catch all the API calls above that user space as well. And this is an example of what it looks like if you inspect the NT allocate virtual memory without an EDR in place. So if my silent strike is not injected into the process, you can see it's following a specific assembly operational code, which is pushing R10 into the RCX, pushing a syscall number into AX, calling the syscall and returning. But if you look at the hooked function, you can see that it's also just unassembling the NT allocate virtual memory. But if you compare the two, you can definitely see a difference there, right? So it's not doing the move instruction. It's immediately starting with a jump instruction to a memory address. And if we would follow that memory address, we will end up into the address space of our EDR vendor, which is a bit out of scope of this talk. But you can clearly see that something fishy is going on with your NT-DLL call. And how can you bypass this? Well, I took a very, very high-level example just to illustrate how syscalls basically work, how red teamers or adversaries, ransomware groups leverage syscalls. So imagine that you have two functions, and you know exactly how function A is implemented. So you have the source code of that function, and you copy-paste the source code of that function into a new function, and you just call it another name. Now, if an EDR is hooking your function A, well, if you call function B, you're basically doing exactly the same thing, right? If you look here at the slides, I do cool stuff. Well, the clone of the hooked function also says I do cool stuff. At runtime, if you look at the outputs, they both say exactly the same, I do cool stuff, which means they are identical, only the naming convention is different. So if your EDR is hooking a certain API call, you actually created that API call yourself, the logic of the API call yourself, and called it a different name, and you instruct your malware or whatever malicious process that you want to use your function instead of the hooked function, well, your EDR allows it because it doesn't have a hook on that function. It doesn't see that call happening. So what are the disadvantages of using C# and using pinvoke? Because pinvoke is commonly referred to as platform invoke. And that's how C# developers normally, in normal use cases, implement Win32 API calls. So these are classically coded in C or C++. And to bridge the gap between C++ and C#, you have a process that we call platform invoke. But the problem there is that it has a very significant tell. If you would inspect the executables import address table, you will clearly see those defined in the import address table. And from a defensive point of view, if you would inspect that import address table and you see virtual alloc, write virtual memory, protect virtual memory, create remote thread, well, you can already kind of tell from, even without reverse engineering anything, just looking at the import address table, that something fishy is going on, because those API calls generally are not that often used in legitimate software. So that's already one drawback. And the other drawback is obviously that your p-invoked code will be, well, it relies on the exported functions of the DLLs that you import. So if your EDR solution hooks those functions, you will get caught. And the Wover actually came up, well, it's not just the Wover, it's a community project, but the Wover is leading it right now. It's on his GitHub repository called Dynamic, and Dynamic tries to be a bit of a help to red team operators. And unfortunately, the drawback is that it also helps, well, the more malicious threat groups out there as well, unfortunately. So what does Dynamic do? It resolves the APIs dynamically, so they don't show up in the import address table, and it has the functionality to evade EDR hooks using either manual mapping, which I'm not going to talk about here, deception, which I'm also not going to talk about here because of time constraints, but the last one, Syscalls, that's the most interesting one, because that one is what I'm going to talk about later. And it's also very easy for red team operators, because it provides function prototypes already by default in the Dynamic library. So that means that from an offensive point of view, you don't have to start Googling the function prototype, start doing the manual translation from C++ into C#. It already has some functionality for you, so you can immediately start leveraging that. And the cool thing is it has a NuGet package, which is the package manager for C#. Unfortunately, it gets flagged by Defender, so it's not really feasible to use anymore, but the source code is freely downloadable on GitHub. So if you would just include the source code into your project and leverage the library from its source without compiling it to the DLL, then Defender will say, hey, no problem, dude, carry on with coding, it's perfectly fine. It has a built-in injection API for process injection that you could leverage if you want to. Of course, you're not obliged to, but it has that functionality. And it's also capable of resolving API calls in 3 ways. The standard way, which is the dynamic way, but it behaves almost exactly the same like p-invoke. Then you have the manual mapping and the overload mapping, which is a bit out of scope of this talk because of time constraints. But it also has the syscall functionality, and that's what I'm going to talk about here. So if you would want to use syscalls in your code and you would want to do that manually, then it's quite annoying to do, because you would have to start creating delegates, you would have to start creating memory allocation, do function pointers, do the translation from C++ or C to C#, and it's a whole hassle. And Dynamic provides the answer with the API that it provides to you. So it's quite easy, actually. You just have syscall, you call generic.getSyscall stub, and you specify the function name that you want to use, and Dynamic will create that pointer for you. So you can then create delegates, say to the delegate, I want the delegate to use that pointer, which will be your syscall pointer, and it will do the syscalls for you, well, almost automatically. So you don't have to do any hard manual coding. It's quite straightforward. So that's very, very nice. And what happens now, if we, again, use our mock EDR and we use syscalls, well, the DLL is not being leveraged. NTDLL.dll is not being leveraged anymore. It's using our custom code that we created, which mimics the NTDLL.dll exported function, but it's not quite the same because you're not calling the exported function anymore. So the EDR is like, okay, this is fine. Go ahead, do your stuff. And that's exactly what happens. if we check now in our site server, we see that our super cool unicorn campaign is active. We see that our unicorn party device checked in, and we can see indeed that the screenshot was taken, as you can see here, very cool with the donut eating unicorn. So it worked flawlessly with an EDR in place. So it's pretty cool. And for closing notes, well, Invoke needs your help. It's an open source project. Submit those PRs with new delegates so we can port the entire Win32 API to Invoke. Because right now, it's really just a handful of people that are trying to keep this project alive. But I love it so very much. I use it in almost all my C# offensive tooling. And I almost exclusively code my offensive tooling in C#, so I'm using it basically all the time. I love it so much, and we really want more people to start leveraging it, more people to submit pull requests, and we're just very happy to bring that to the attention of everyone. So that's it for the presentation. Maybe I can give a small demo, but I'm always scared to do that. But I'm going to try it anyway. So what I have here is, well, I would have to drag it over here, is my Scythe instance with the campaign manager in there. Super cool unicorn campaign. It's still there. Right now it's inactive, right? So I have this virtual machine, which is my unicorn party machine. And I have basically my unicorns shellcode, which is the site client, unicorn.bin, and I have my Invoke shellcode injector. And what EDR goes brr basically does is it has some input parameters. So it's expecting you to provide a parent to do the parent spoofing. It asks you whether or not you want to do the syscall or the manual mop, but since this talk was about syscalls, I will do the syscall method. And it asks you for the file, which is your shellcode file. So what I do now is I provided Explorer as the parent process. I want to spawn into Notepad, and I want to inject the unicorn's shellcode payload into the Notepad process. So if I press this button, you can see Notepad spawned. It asks me to hit the key to allocate memory. I will do that. Write memory. I will do that. Create a thread. I will do that. It says injecting. So if we would now check our campaign, it does indeed says, the status is active. So something's happening. Unicorn Party is indeed getting some nice, well, input from the loader. So now I just have to wait a little bit. Yeah, the print screen has been taken, and there you go. Boom. Live on tape. So that's it for me. I think timing wise, I did quite well. If there are any questions, feel free to shout them out.
That was awesome. Great work, man. That's why we invite you on. You do these very nice technical talks, and now Olaf is busy and you ruined his weekend.
Yeah, he's already starting to write detection rules now.
No, that was awesome, man. Thank you so much for your time. Obviously playing with this and building this out. Really, really cool. Love the name of EDR goes brr. It's a Latino thing. I don't know how many of you can roll your R's, but that's my interpretation of how it goes. But awesome. Thank you again.